Delighted to say my next guest has extensive experience in the racing and gambling sectors at the very highest level. For 8 years, from 2000 to 2008, he was managing director of Coral. For 6 subsequent years, he was non-executive director of the Gala Coral Group. He has been the boss of Carpetright since 2014 and has also maintained his links with racing as an owner, a syndicate member, and also a consultant to first Racing for Change and then Great British Racing as a non-executive director. He is Wilf Walsh. Wilf, welcome to Luck on Sunday.
Nice to be here.
And good to see you. And you were one of about 4,000 people this week who was listed as a potential successor to Nick Rust as Chief Executive of the BHA. Do you fancy it?
Include me out, I think, is the best description of that. I was surprised Ben Keith managed to find time out from taking photos of his dinners in various West End restaurants to make a market, but I'll apologise to anybody who took the 22-1 publicly now.
Is it something in any parallel life that you might have considered?
Probably not. I think, you know, when you're a CEO of a business, and you alluded to it earlier, it's about having control of that business. So I think the way that, you know, people like Bernie Ecclestone had control of F1, the way people like Barry Hearn have got control of snooker. It's always worth listening to Simon Bazalgette, who's always been a couple of pounds ahead of the handicapper. And his way out of the Jockey Club door, he said the problem is with the tripartite agreement, how do you manage the BHA, the Horsemen and the RCA? It's a really difficult job, and I think ultimately it's about regulation. It's not a pure CEO's job in that sense.
And it seems to be a job, I know any CEO's job is going to have pressure.
Yeah.
You don't pay people a lot of money for them not to have any pressure. Mm-hmm. They've got a lot of responsibility. But it strikes me that the BHA Chief Executive's job is one that has all sorts of attendant stress involved with it, and issues that it's almost impossible to resolve.
Yeah, I think that is the case, and I think they're going on this, you know, long search now, and I was sort of minded of the, you know, hiring recruitment consultants and headhunters are very difficult. We're talking about the, you know, the FA Premier League job, where I think they went through 2 executive search firms trying to find the new boss of the Premier League. You know, the first choice, she didn't turn up for orientation day. The second choice thought about it and thought, I'm sulking because I'm not the first choice. The third choice had some dodgy texting action that excluded him. And the fourth unsuccessful candidate was hiding under the boardroom desk all the time and existed. Now, if the BHA Chief Exec job is about regulation and governance, then there are 2 or 3 candidates in that market, Star Sports created, who are perfectly able to do that job. So why go off on a search? The salary is about 300k, pay a recruitment company £100,000, hire one of those candidates, stick 100 grand into the racing welfare bin. Save us all a lot of time and trouble.
You make it sound so easy.
I don't think the job is easy, but I mean, you know, reflecting, and I think Nick has done, you know, a really good job, and will probably be a hard act to follow. But like you say, it is not one of the easiest jobs in sports because you don't have that, ultimately have total control.
But the interesting thing is Nick is a front foot leader. He's quite charismatic. He doesn't mind appearing on television. He's quite a personality in that role. Yet you're almost advocating hiring someone who perhaps isn't that sort of front foot personality, figurehead style leader.
Look, I mean, one of the challenges with racing is it needs to be more outward looking. So if you're managing the parish, then it's managing, you know, regulation, government relationships, etc., of the sport. I'm more concerned about racing looking outward, and therefore it's about the promotion of racing, and that's really down to the racecourses and to, you know, the excellent Rod Street and the Get Along gang at GBR, who I think need to be funded more aggressively to promote the game. The internal stuff, you know, we agonise about all these issues, you know, on your hot list this morning, but we're all converted. You know, we're all there. We all love the sport. We're talking to each other or on social media arguing with each other. It's about looking outwards, and I think the BHA Chief Executive job is more about managing the internal issues within racing.
Because as you rightly point out, they've got their marketing and promotional arm, now called Great British Racing.
Yeah.
Started off as Racing for Change in 2009-10. You were part of that. When you were involved initially in Racing for Change, there was quite a bit of resistance to that, wasn't there?
Well, quite a bit of resistance, yeah. I mean, racing can be funny. I mean, you know, it almost looks like a cult of middle-aged white men who don't want anyone else to play. I remember at Racing for Change, we were talking about Champions Day, which, you know, time marches on, 10th year, and we talked about moving Champions Day from Newmarket. Now, you know, Newmarket, Champions Day, there's about 10,000 people going, an east wind cutting across the fens, 40 quid cab ride from Cambridge train station. It didn't take a lot of imaginative thinking to say, well, if you want an end-of-season party to celebrate the best of British racing and breeding, then have it at the best racecourse in the world, near London, and get 40,000 people to go. Sounds easy. It wasn't easy, but it, you know, with a bit of luck and good weather and Frankel, it's become, I think, a roaring success, and it hasn't affected the all-important pattern, God forbid. You know, so that's the challenge, and that's actually not innovation. You know, that was just moving a meeting. You talk about things like city racing, which I think is a brilliant idea. It just immediately, there's this pile-on from people in racing, the converted, who don't want change, same as the 5-day festival. Sorry to bring it up again, but there you go.
Well, you may as well have your tuppence worth on the 5-day festival from a commercial standpoint.
Yeah, get on with it. I mean, you know, a couple of extra races, 6 races a day, finish a festival on a Saturday. The question is, does it grow turnover? Because racing, its fortunes are inextricably linked to betting through the levy and through media rights. You can't get away from that. And all the research says when people go on a racecourse, they want to win money and they want to have a bet. And you're right, people shouldn't demonise betting because it's so closely linked. But you know, I just think that there needs to be a more balanced argument. And the chairman of Cheltenham is right to commercially consider whether 5 days will grow the levy and therefore turnover and the return to racing and the commercial benefits to Cheltenham. It's a passing comment, and then the world, you know, swarms on it as though it's a child murderer. It's very odd sometimes.
Let's talk about the relationship between horse racing and betting and the symbiosis therein. And you rightly point out that now slice of media rights income has slightly lessened the absolute importance of the levy. But still racing depends on the betting pound to a huge extent. What can racing do to promote responsible gambling, but to not just simply jump on the bandwagon and say we don't really want anything to do with people having a bet? Well,
it's not easy, is it? I mean, I think what Bookmaker has done over the past week has done something truly incredible, which is to unite The Guardian and the Daily Mail on one issue, which is unheard of. And so the headlines make for very uncomfortable reading. The facts are, and I think it was on your timeline, 0.7% of people polled, 0.7% of people polled across gambling, not just racing or football, this is casinos and bingo and lottery. 0.7 identify as having a problem. Now that's a small number. A lot of people like a bet. I love a bet. But, you know, having a bet on a Saturday or a bet on one of your own horses or having a glass of wine on a Saturday or a Friday night doesn't make you an alcoholic. Neither does having a bet make you a degenerate. And that appears to be, you know, the assumption that people reading the papers will make. And I think racing has got to be careful because its fortunes are dependent on growing the turnover on British betting. That's a fact.
Gambling is not inherently bad, surely is the message that has to go out. Same as you said, having a glass of wine is not inherently bad.
Yeah. But I think, you know, there is a sort of pile-on social media from people into racing who sort of misunderstand that relationship. I've just recently given up chairing the betting liaison group, and that's you know, a levy board initiative. And you meet the traders from the betting companies, and they are all seriously looking at how can they grow turnover on this product that we all love. How can you do it? And you know, I think it's very, very dangerous debate that we lost control of. Now, that's not to say that 340,000 people with a gambling addiction is not a problem. And and the betting companies have got to step up and spend the right amount of money to manage some of these issues that, you know, they are partly responsible for creating. And that includes some of these excessive VIP grooming schemes that have been exposed recently. I personally am uncomfortable with seeing betting companies on football shirts because this is pandering to a Far Eastern audience. These are brands none of us have ever heard of, and we've been betting for nearly 30 years. So there are things that the betting companies could do now before it happens to them, to get on the front foot, manage the debate more effectively. But racing, and it could be in racing's benefit, because there may be more money or sponsorship for racing, which will be excluded from some of these watershed ideas that may crop up.
So you were MD at Corals from 2000 to 2008.
Yeah.
Can you put your hand on your heart and say that you were any less exploitative than betting companies are now?
No, being honest. You know, you run a private company, whether it's a PLC or a private equity-led company, it's about profit. How can I maximise the profits in my business? We're all equally culpable, as are the chief executives of smoking companies and drinking companies. But, you know, every time somebody smokes a cigarette, they're harming themselves and they're harming people around them. That's not the case for gambling. And, you know, we always say, if you look at the issues the NHS have got, and the NHS has got major funding issues, you know, gambling is an auditing error versus, you know, smoking, drugs or sugar even. And I think, you know, the racing industry collectively could come together with bookmakers and do a much better job on this in terms of public perception.
Isn't it the case that gambling doesn't cause mental health issues? It is mental health issues that mean that people have addiction problems, which can be manifest through either gambling or drinking or smoking or narcotics or whatever else you can become addicted to, and you can become addicted to anything. Isn't that a reasonable philosophy to advance?
It's a reasonable philosophy to advance, no doubt about that. And there is regrettably a small percentage of the population who have a self-destruct button, which is genetic, on whatever it is. You know, whether it's gambling, smoking, pornography, whatever it is. What the betting companies and the industry have got to be careful of is how they manage that, and are they seen to be proactively making that situation worse for a person.
So, i.e. finding the person who's got a weakness and just going for the weakness,
yeah, I mean,
to exploit it over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I'm very, you know, don't believe everything you read in the paper, but if some of these VIP grooming schemes are true, then it's a pretty difficult read. You know, when I was running the business, you'd always invite your best customers racing. But there's a difference between, you know, a social day out and actually plugging bonuses into their account to encourage them to fire up more. And it's a very difficult line. We're all grown-ups. We've all learned how to climb out of trees and not get run over by cars. There is personal responsibility, but we do have to protect that small percentage of people who have a problem.
So in your mind, have bookmakers buried their head in the sand for too long on this? And are they the architects of their own destruction?
I don't think they're the architects of it. I think they could do more collectively as a group, you know, to take this on. And, you know, once you lose the headlines, you're in danger of losing, you know, the war. And if you've got to get behind those headlines. I mean, the one last week about, you know, 50,000 minors addicted to gambling. I mean, they're not, you know, children who are betting online with sports companies. They're scratch card players or what have you. But it doesn't matter. That's the perception at the moment. How do you manage the perception?
Yes.
And that's where they're failing at present.
And of course, bookmaking is inextricably linked with racing. So it's not inextricably linked with football, even though there's far more bet on football than there is on racing.
Yeah.
But racing is inextricably linked to gambling. So racing's reputation gets tarnished because of this. So what does racing do about that?
Well, it stops demonising bookmakers. I mean, I know this is an old subject now, but I was reflecting on bookmakers' sponsorship of yards, for instance. I thought Dan Skelton was very eloquent on this show last week explaining his Ladbroke sponsorship. And the fact is, these sponsorships used to be what the newspapers did. You know, sponsored jockeys to talk, sponsored trainers to talk. Now we're running out of space. Separate issue. Racing is reducing in column inches, and racing journalists are being made redundant. So what's wrong with Coral sponsoring Joe Tizard and letting people know on a blog what is happening in that yard, how horses are doing, etc., etc.? You've got other trainers coming out saying, well, you know, a bookmaker shouldn't be involved. Well, presumably they've got funding from other areas. But actually what these blogs are doing is promoting the sport, and you've got to accept that having a bet on a racecourse is one of the main reasons people go. And you've got to accept that through the levy and through media rights, betting and racing have got to get along better. It's a fact.
I thought 3-4 years ago racing and betting were getting along better, but are they not now, or is it simply that racing wants to slightly distance itself from the betting industry for perception reasons?
I don't think that is the case. I mean, just recently chairing this betting liaison group, I mean, I think, people are actively looking at ways to, manage basic things like, off times during major football championships, a trial for, why can't a race go off at 2:08 rather than 2:05? I mean, nothing worse than, split screens on this channel that affects turnover. So
Tell me about it.
Yeah, I know, but they are talking, and I don't think turnover on racing is going down because we just don't see the Bet365 figures because they're such a massive private company. So I think betting on racing is relatively healthy. I just think the hoo-ha about gambling is the fly in the ointment at the moment.
When you say it's a hoo-ha, people will seize on that and say there's ex-Coral's boss describing it as belittling it as a hoo-ha. Can you reassure people that's not what you're doing?
Well, I've already said I think the betting company should be paying their whack and to help with this. But I think, like any debate, you have to put it in perspective, the wider perspective of the travails that the NHS has to deal with. I assumed, anyway, there's going to be an extra £350 million a week going into the NHS post-Brexit, so maybe a chunk of that can go towards it. So it's the last thing I'm doing is belittling it. And I've personal experience of it running a betting company and reading letters from customers. And we used to, in the old days of telephone betting, used to send out hampers at Christmas to, top 250 customers. And a number of customers would say, well, don't send me a hamper because I don't want, a hamper from my good friends at Coral arriving on the doorstep. Well, we screwed up and we sent a hamper, and I got a letter back from a woman who was married to one of our customers who said, well, thanks, at least we'll have something to eat this Christmas. And it's stuff like that that makes you realise that there are people out there with problems. You don't belittle it, and bookmaking has got to pay its full share of helping to treat it.
So that's bookmaking's responsibility. What's racing's chief responsibility to its client base?
Well, I think it has to look outwards. It has to stay relevant. And, we've got 6 million people a year go racing. You've got festivals like Ascot, the Grand National Festival, Cheltenham, that are part of the national public consciousness, part of who we are. How do you stay relevant to the under 35s? My children have explained esports to me. It took them 3 goes to explain it to me, but that's the next big opportunity. And I think it's not preaching to the converted, but preaching to the unconverted and getting more people racing. That's the challenge. And more people having a responsible bet because of the levy system. An example would be Chris Hughes, who I think has been a fantastic find for racing, ex-Love Island, what have you. I come back from the Cheltenham Festival.
Former guest on this show.
Yeah, comes back, and a very eloquent individual who's ridden out and understands his race and is passionate about it. I come back from the Cheltenham Festival in the office, you've been racing again. Yeah, how'd it go? And nobody wanted to talk about, album photo winning the Gold Cup. But when I said I've got a photo of myself and Chris Hughes, the scramble over the desks to get and have a look was intense.
Isn't the reason that Chris Hughes is a success for racing because he's authentic, insofar as he rides horses very well to a pretty high standard, he's passionate about the animals, he loves having a bet, and he's a very good communicator. So, yeah, you've absolutely nailed it there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Chris Hughes don't grow on trees, and you can't simply pluck anyone from it. He's not some abstracted random reality star that the sport has just plucked out and tried to make knowledgeable about horse racing, is he? That's the thing. He is an authentic fan of the sport.
But if you go on social media, you see people complaining, I was on the racecourse and look at these guys with their trendy beards and they're wearing tight trousers and no socks. Look at, is this what's happening to the game? Yes, it is, because that's what young people do, and that's how they dress. And by the way, I don't like your mustard jumbo cords, but, I'm not going to stop you going onto a racetrack. And what racing has got to do is try and embrace this younger generation of people who haven't got time or the energy or the inclination to go through the form lines on horses, but to get them engaged with the sport, which is why I think GBR and the team are dreadfully underfunded, and we need the racecourses and GBR to promote the game more effectively.
But don't you want people to get so sucked into the sport that they are interested in the minutiae of it? And isn't that part of what makes racing what it is, that it is quite complex and multi-layered.
Yeah.
It's not that intellectually challenging, for goodness sake. It's whichever brown horse passes the
brown
stick
horse
first.
with a swishy tail. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not as... I think sometimes we try and pretend that it's really complicated. Yes, there are complexities, but the complexities aren't that difficult once you've spent a few minutes working it out.
Yeah, and that's the, how do you turn the once a year, stag do customer or birthday customer or corporate invite customer into buying an annual badge? And it's a real challenge because there are so many other distractions. But what racing can't do is just write young people off. We're an ageing population. I'm part of it. I've been doing it for years. It's the next generation that we're more interested in getting engaged with the game.
But do you get well served by the sport as an owner, as a punter, as a race goer, as all these things that you've enjoyed about it for years as a fan and as someone who's worked in it? Yeah,
by and large, I do. I mean, we all have our favourite race courses. I mean, every pound you put in as an owner, you write off. Every time I speak to Nick Gifford about how one of the horses is going, he'll always say he's in good order from the trainer's handbook, page 36, paragraph 2. It's what I enjoy. It's fun, and I've reached the age where I sit in certain meetings, I have to check my pulse to check whether I'm floating above the conversation and near-death experience. If I own one and it's coming over the last at Cheltenham neck and neck with something else, I don't need to check my pulse. I know I'm alive, particularly if I've had a bet. So I personally feel well served. My concern is getting new people into the game. That's the challenge.
And how was it for you personally working in the game? Because running Coral, it's not just about horse racing, but how was it for you personally being in that sector relative to working for HMV beforehand and being the boss of Carpetright for the last 6 years?
No difference, really. I mean, I think if you look at the makeup of the betting liaison group, the traders who sit around that group, and people are very cynical about bookmakers. Most people get into bookmaking because they love the sport. And they're first and foremost, they love the sport. And as they get more senior through those businesses, they get further and further away from the reason they joined in the first place, because you end up doing managerial jobs, etc., etc. Running the business I do now outside of the sport, I would reflect on the fact that you get invited to a lot of social events and VIP tickets. And in 5.5 years of doing this job, I've been invited to Six Nations, football, golf. I've not had one racing invite. Not because people think it's a busman's holiday for me or he won't be interested because he's into it, but because I've just not had an invite because the corporate world, by and large, doesn't see it. And that is a worry, because a day at the races should be just as attractive as a day at Twickenham, well, more attractive actually.
And it's a lot easier to entertain clients at the races than it is at a football match or a rugby match, I would argue, because you've got more time and space to socialise.
Yeah, correct.
And possibly a more pleasant, natural environment in which to...
Well, and again, one of the excuses that Racecourse makes, and I think it's an excuse, because I think Sunday racing should be much bigger than it is now, is we can't get the corporate client. Liverpool are playing Manchester United today. You get a lot of Six Nation games on a Sunday. I think it's an excuse. I think you need to work harder as a group to get Sunday racing bigger than it is currently.
And presumably, attracting the corporate client means putting on a facility that's actually comparable to what you might get at Lord's or the Etihad or the Emirates, and they're pretty damn swanky.
Yeah, they are, but they're not all like that. And I think, catering at racecourses has improved largely over the years, but it's just that confidence. We can't get people out on a Sunday. Be confident about the product, be more joyful about the product they're all involved in, and sell it harder, and people will come.
But haven't they tried it? Haven't they sliced Sunday racing every which way? And apart from maybe the Sunday of the November Cheltenham meeting, there isn't a Sunday that really works. I mean, 1,000 Guineas Sunday doesn't really work. It's a bad television audience. Not many people go.
Yeah. But, I mean, that doesn't stop Championship football clubs selling out their corporate hospitality, and I challenge you about the quality of some of those games. It's a day out. It's a family day out. And some people say, well, actually going to football brings its own challenges in terms of your ability to take a group of kids. And I think it's a corporate day out. And if it's not working, it's not being marketed well enough.
And you're someone who obviously, would finish where we started with the BHA. You're someone who's broad-shouldered enough to be able to take on stressful, responsible situation. We've seen it at Carpet-Rite in the last few years. Talk me through the psychology of that at the head of a boardroom when you're having to wear a difficult situation and go through all that entails and the media scrutiny on you personally.
Well, I think, you know, like most retailers, we've had a difficult time, and most retailers includes bookmakers, by the way, you know, leisure retailing, as I call it. Stop sniggering at the back. But so closing shops and making people redundant and running a PLC is stressful, but that's what you get paid. That's what you get paid for. In my mind, is protecting 3,000 jobs in the UK, Ireland, Holland and Belgium, you know, which ultimately we've done because we're going private next week. We're coming off the stock market. So you can look back on that and say, well, that's what I wanted to do, is protect jobs and protect livelihoods. And so nobody's really got any sympathy for you, because they look at the annual accounts and see what you're paid and think, well, you know, he's all right. You do need to be broad shoulders. You do need to not believe everything you read in the paper, and don't take it personally on social media either. And that's how you do it.
So your recommendation for the next man to run British racing is? Be
a woman, which would be nice. I know 2 or 3 of those names that were mentioned who are existing incumbents at 75, High Holborn, perfectly capable of doing the job.
OK. And there is, of course, a female chair for the BHA.
Yeah. Well, if you look at that list of... Star
very few women on that Star Sports list.
Not the only lack of diversity on there, to be quite frank, but that's probably an issue in the sport generally. OK, we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more when Ben and Maddie come back to join us. But for the moment, Wilf Walsh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Wilf Walsh, MD of Corals for 8 years, non-executive Gullah